Okay, I want to just share with you one beautiful idea we find in the Parsha, and it actually comes down to one word. One word, and I don't know any other word in Hebrew that has this power to be the most destructive, the most powerfully poisonous word that could be used, which we're going to see in the context of the Parsha, or one of the most elevated words that is really the apex of our tefillah. This one word is like a double-edged sword. In one context, it ends up causing the most debilitating effect on and Klal Yisrael, and in another context is probably the greatest shevach, praise to Hashem. Okay, we're going to get to that one word in a second. Let's have a look at the context. And the context goes like this. We know that the spies were sent into Eretz Yisrael to tour the land. And they were given specific instructions, as detailed in the Parsha, what to look for. They were told to look at the land itself. What's the land like? Is it full of fruits and vegetables? Are there trees? Do they give of their fruit? What are the cities like? Are they walled cities? Or are they open cities? Again, they're planning to take their forces into Canaan to conquer the land of Israel, which is our inheritance, our Yerusha. And so they had to figure out, what is the army like? What were the people like in there? Are they big, strong people? Are they weak people? These are all the questions that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted answered and told the spies to come back with a report as to what the land of Israel was really all like. And actually, they do exactly as they are told. They go, they tour out the land, they see what's happening, and they come back with a very accurate report. They say the land is full of fruits, and the fruits are big and luscious, and it is a land flowing with milk and honey, and there are cities there, and there are nations there that want to hurt us. Amalek is there. They came back with a very accurate report, and yet for some reason, they are punished severely for this report. Imagine, the CIA sends off a group of spies into Russia, and they walk around the land, and they're told to figure out what Putin is up to, which itself is a big avodah, right? No one can really figure it out. And they spend weeks and months, they manage to infiltrate the KGB and the Politburo, and they're trying to figure out what he's doing, what his plans are. And they come back, and they report, and they're like, yeah, this guy's big trouble. Like World War III is looming. And they list off all the challenges that they're going to have in order to, in this case, protect themselves from the Russians. In our case, to protect themselves from the Canaanim, from these nations. And yet, they spoke the worst lashon hara. They spoke terribly about the land. Yotza diba ala aretz. And they were all put to death for doing this. And all the Jewish people were makabel the lashon hara, accepted the lashon hara, and we know from the Rambam that listening to lashon hara is worse than actually speaking it. The makabel, the one who accepts the report, is considered worse than the one who actually speaks the report. So they get punished for that as well. They now have to spend another 40 years in the Midbar, and only their children are going to make it into Eretz Yisrael. What did they do wrong? That is the question of the Ramban. And the Ramban actually gives a fascinating answer. And he says, here's the question. They did exactly what they meant to do. Sivautam lerot hashmena. He says, what exactly is the land like? And they gave the same answer. Sivat chalav udavashi. And there is perot on the trees. Everything they did. And he says, V'nei b'chol ze amru emet. Everything they said was true. As they were commanded to do. So what exactly was their problem? And he says the most fascinating answer. And he says the one problem they had was the one word that they used, which was a sign that they had no hope of conquering the land. And what was that? Ephes. Ephes is one of those words. In modern Hebrew, it means zero. But I guess you could say there was zero chance that we're going to be able to go in and conquer this land because the enemy is there. We should give up and return to Egypt. Basically, imagine the spies go into Russia and they come back and they're like, we have no chance. And they don't come report back to the CIA. They go directly on the mainstream media. They go online. They go onto Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, and they're like, we went to spy the land. We're all done. We're never going to win. What's going to happen? Everyone is going to give up hope of ever taking their rightful inheritance, the land of Israel. When they said Ephes, they basically gave their opinion. Stating facts is okay. And according to the Ramban, that's totally fine. Stating facts as how they saw them and what they're up against was exactly their job. But who are you to give your opinion? And you've done considered to be the worst sin in the Torah, which led to them having to live in the desert for another 40 years, which is making people give up hope, giving up on salvation, making them lose hope as to their ability to conquer the enemy and take that which was rightfully theirs. Giving up hope, saying, Ephes, we're never going to be able to overcome this challenge. We're never going to be able to overcome this war. This enemy is going to kill us. When you give up hope, you're basically saying, Hashem is not able to win our wars for us. This is considered to be the worst sin. It is considered to be Lashon Hara, and because of it, the entire nation had to remain in the Midbar for another 40 years. The night they spent crying, complaining, became the future holiday of Tisha B'Av, because that's when it happened, the 9th of Av, and it would become the worst day in Jewish history. You know, I must tell you a story about the power of never giving up hope in even the most dire circumstances. It's actually a story I read in an amazing book, one of my favorite books that I've had to buy, I think like 6 or 7 times. Every time I buy it, I lend it to someone, I don't get it back. It's okay. I'm a vater. It's all good. I have that in mind when I lend it. If you give it back, good. If not, not. And invariably, they don't give it back, because I didn't find a copy on my shelf this morning when I was looking for it. The book is called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust by Yafa Eliach. It's an amazing sefer. This book, written by this professor Yafa Eliach, who's actually a teacher of my wife, and who's actually her daughter is one of my co-teachers at Yeshiva University. And she wrote a positive, inspirational book about the Holocaust. And in this book, she conducts interviews with Holocaust survivors to hear their miraculous Yeshuot, their miraculous savings during the Holocaust. So it's really a very uplifting and not a depressing book at all. One of the stories in this book is amazing. In the story, she interviewed this now elderly gentleman in the 1970s, but he'd been a survivor of the war, and he'd been a young teenager during the war. And he lived in some town, I think in Poland, I can't remember where it was, and he had one sister. And he says in this interview that the sister was the most amazing, special, beautiful girl you'd ever seen in your entire life. He came home one day, he saw his parents curled up crying, screaming. Why? Because the Gestapo had come, taken this girl off the street, kidnapped her, and taken her to Gestapo headquarters they set up in this town in Poland. So this boy says, Ima Abba, I'm going to go get her back. And they freaked out. They're going to kidnap you as well. We're not going to have a daughter, and we're not going to have a son. Please don't go. And he starts to fight. He says, I'm going to go and get my sister out of the hands of the Gestapo in that. They're like, no way. They're going to know you're Jewish. You got to start. Forget about it. He's like, I don't care. Don't say never. Don't say Ephes. I'm going in. He goes to the Gestapo, a little Jewish boy, teenager, in occupied Poland, knocks on Gestapo headquarters. They open the door, and there's this little Jew sitting before them. He walks in, and he says, you have my sister. This is her name. I want her back. What do? They start laughing at him, hitting him, kicking him, pushing him over. He says, every time they push me over, I stood up, and I said it louder. I want my sister back now. I'm not leaving without my sister. They start shouting, laughing, throwing things at him. Eventually, they made such a commotion, such a rush, that the commander, the head of the Gestapo in that unit, heard and came out to see what all the commotion was about. So he walks out, and he sees them laughing at this little Jewish boy, throwing things, pushing him, kicking, spitting at him, dirty Jew, kick. And he's like, what's the situation? And they're like, this Jew boy says we have his sister, and he wants her back. What's the sister's name? He goes, the name. He goes, yep, she's here. He goes, I want her back. He starts laughing as well. You dirty Jew, forget about it. Then the commander says, you know what? I'll make a deal with you. And this is as he gave over in the interview. If you grow hair on the palm of your hand right now, I'll let her go. And they will burst out laughing, a raucous laughter. The boy takes his hand out of his pocket, lifts up his hand, opens it up, and on his hand, there is a patch of hair that is sprouting out of his hand. They freak out. The commander starts shouting in German, screaming, calling him a demon, you demonic Jews. We know you're demons, you're witches, you have witchcraft. He goes to the back cell, grabs this boy's sister, throws the girl. He says she hits him. They both fall down on the ground. They jump up. He grabs her hand. He runs out. They both survive the war. What's the story? This young boy's father had owned the bakery in the town. And when he was younger, he used to love playing with the machines in his father's bakery. There was a mill, there was an oven, all the different apparatus they use in this bakery. One day he put his hand into one of the machines and it started to go. And it scraped the skin off of his hand completely. They had to rush him to the local hospital and they're like, we have to save your hand. They did an operation. They took a skin graft. They took skin from his leg, removed it, and they sewed it onto his hand. And over the coming weeks, months, and years, he had grown hair on his hand. By the time he was a teenager, he had a full, and he used to be so embarrassed. He would always walk around with his hand in his pocket or his hand closed, because when the boys would see it, they'd see hair on his palm, and they would make fun of him and laugh at him. He says, now I realize, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God put me through that circumstance. That embarrassing moment in my life ended up becoming my Yeshua, my saving of my sister. And I spoke to a doctor many years later, he said, and I said, why did this happen? And the doctor said, it doesn't really make sense scientifically, but your hand doesn't know science. And so it grew hair on your hand. Never give up. I must add an addendum to this story, my dear friends, if you don't mind. About 26, 27 years ago, I was a single guy, and I went to one of my rabbanim for Sukkot. And I was sitting in the sukkah, and he had many different guests. You know, I learned from this rabbi to bring many guests into my sukkah. And so, perfect timing. I'm sitting in the sukkah, and this rabbi had a minhag. You either had to sing a song, a Jewish song, a zemer, or give a Devar Torah or a story. Now, I can't sing. If you heard me sing, you'll understand. But I do like to tell stories. So I just bought this book, and it came into my head to say this particular story. Sitting next to me was a young secular Jewish boy who the rabbi had found on some college campus, and he was doing a PhD. And he was a nice guy, but very, very cynical about anything Jewish. And so it came to me, and I told this story about this boy in the Holocaust from Yafa Elias' book with the hair in his, and I finished the story, and I was like, oh, what a beautiful story, very nice. The boy, this PhD student sitting next to me, I see turns white. Turns white, and he's completely speechless. And I start talking to him, and he's not giving me a response. And a few minutes later, I said to him, you okay, buddy? What's going on? He says, I must tell you something. This is the first ever Jewish, this is true, first ever Jewish thing I've ever done. Definitely the first sukkah I've ever sat in. And I was looking for a kind of sign. I was looking for a sign that, am I in the right place? Because I believe in signs. And he says, you just said the most extraordinary story. And he lifted up his finger, and on the tip of his pointer finger was hair that was growing out of his finger. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? And he said, when I was a kid, I caught my finger in a bike chain, and it removed the top of my finger off. And they took a skin graft, and they grafted a skin from a part of my body, and I've been growing hair on my finger all these years. And I was, why would God do this to me? It's such a weird, extraordinary event. Here I am with hair growing on my finger. He goes, I see It was in order for me to be here, hear that story, and somehow take out a lesson in my life. That's what he told me. The extraordinary story. And I was freaked out, let alone him. It freaked me out, right? Having to tell that story in the sukkah at that precise moment. The word Ephes is a terrible word, but it's also a beautiful word. Because we say it at the apex of our tefillah, which is in Aleinu. We say Ephes Zulato. There's nothing else except HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now there, my dear friends, the word Ephes refers to nothing else but Hashem's power. In that context, when you say to yourself, there is Ephes, there is nothing besides HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then already it's an amazing and powerful and special word. Have a great and successful day. Chazak v'amatz.